Juno Dawson is an author of multiple YA novels that I've never read, and a bunch of non-fiction like The Gender Games, This Book is Gay, and What's the Tea. And now, Her Majesty's Royal Coven is her first adult novel. This is a lively and deceptively political novel set in the modern day about a group of 4 witches. When the novel begins, we're in a prologue, where these girls are all around the age of 10 and they're about to be inducted into witchcraft. In this world, a small percentage of people have some sort of magical power, and they are either witches or warlocks. And the big organised government entity is HMRC. Her Majesty's Royal Coven. The 4 girls from the prologue are our protagonists. But from chapter 1 onwards, they are in their mid-30s and they've all gone their separate ways. They are all now living distinct lives. You've got Helena, Elle, Leonie, and Neve. Neve, I guess, is our protagonist of the 4, if there is one, but the chapters flip between all 4 of them, Game of Thrones style. Helena is now the High Priestess of Her Majesty's Royal Coven. Neve lives in Hebden Bridge, and we learn that she had a fiancé who has died, and he died thanks to some kind of a war that took place about 10 years ago when these girls were in their mid-20s. And this was a war between HMRC, which all 4 of them used to be members of, and a terror cell of powerful witches and warlocks that did something bad. As for the other 2 girls, you've got Elle, who lives with her husband, who doesn't know that she's a witch, and her daughter Holly, who she has started to suspect may also be a witch. And then you've got Leonie, who lives in London with her wife. Wife? Girlfriend? I think girlfriend. Wife? Can't remember. And Leonie has actually set up her own coven, a more progressive, small coven for queer people and black people because she is a queer black person. So that's our setup. And I'd like to say up front that if you're a fan of the Atlas 6, which is the big talking point YA novel of 2022, you're really going to enjoy this. Because it's very similar to the Atlas 6 in terms of its tone, in terms of its setting and characters a little bit, but what really separates it from the Atlas 6 is that this is actually good. I read the Atlas 6. It wasn't very good. This is similar in many ways, but it's actually good. You can actually tell all 4 of our protagonists apart. They are very separate and distinct people with unique personalities, and they are adults that actually act like adults. Whereas I read the whole of the Atlas 6 thinking the protagonists were all a bunch of 15-year-olds, and it turns out they're all supposed to be in their 20s and 30s. And that was just incredibly cringe to me. But my point stands. If you're a fan of the Atlas 6, this is really going to satisfy you, and it'll show you what a good book looks like. I'm not sorry. So we've got our 4 protagonists, who are all still friends, but are living separate adult lives. 2 of them have children, 2 of them don't. And then you've got the plot's catalyst, which is a child called Theo. Theo has recently been discovered as an incredibly powerful magic user that did something very, very destructive and has been taken into custody by HMRC. And the oracles at Her Majesty's Royal Coven are saying that Theo is going to bring about the rise of Leviathan. In this book, the devil really exists and was split into 3 different beasts. And one of those beasts is Leviathan. And it's Theo that will do this. And Neve steps in and says to Helena, who again is the High Priestess, hey, listen, can I take Theo to my house in Hebden Bridge and just see if we can work things out a little bit, and I'll see if I can raise him and help him and heal him and calm all of this down a bit. And Helena says, okay, fine, but we'll be keeping an eye on you. And so Neve has this mute boy that she needs to look after. And she's also taking in Elle's daughter Holly and teaching these 2 kids how to be magic, teaching them to control their powers and utilize their powers responsibly. And so Theo is the driving force of the novel. You have to wonder if this boy is going to turn out to be this evil bringer of darkness or not. Now, in terms of the world building and the characters, this is just endless fun. It's a very, very clever world that they've created, a world of witches and magic and subterfuge, and so far, so urban fantasy. But it gets very, very cleverly political as the novel goes on. And in order for me to talk about that, I need to spoil something that happens a little bit before the halfway point. If you like the sound of this book so far and you want to bounce from the video, go ahead. But I'm now going to spoil something that happens just before the halfway point, which is a pretty big moment. And the reason I want to spoil it is because it will allow me to talk about the politics and the philosophy of this book in a lot more detail without going into any of the events of the second half. Okay, here we go. Just before the halfway point, we find out that Theo, the boy that Neve has under her care, who might bring about some kind of apocalyptic cataclysm, is actually transgender. Now, I made a TikTok video a few days ago at the time of recording where I talked about a bunch of trans books that you should read for Trans Awareness Week, and one person suggested this. And I'd had this book on my radar for a few weeks, and I was gearing up to buy it anyway, and I was excited to find out how it was trans, other than the fact that the author, Juno Dawson, is a trans author, and I already knew that. And then I had my answer. This catalyst character, Theo, is trans. And from here on, without getting into too many specifics, we've got our 4 protagonists adjusting to the fact that Theo is a girl. I want to make it clear that Theo was assigned male at birth, and is mute. And so it's taken some mind reading and some bonding for them to figure out that one of the issues that Theo has had, one of the things that has fed her trauma, is the fact that she's trans. And as she comes to be accepted by Neve and by Holly, she gets better. I won't tell you any more about the plot and the events, but as for the characters, Theo being trans changes a lot of dynamics politically. Characters get revealed as sympathetic, empathetic, kind, progressive. They get ideas about the world of witchcraft and how Her Majesty's Royal Coven is run based on Theo being trans. Theo's transness opens their eyes to the rights and wrongs of witchhood and witchdom. For example, and we find this out before Theo comes out, Theo is incredibly powerful, and the book's lore establishes that witches are more powerful than warlocks. The power of witches and warlocks is separated into levels from 1 to 5, and warlocks do not reach level 5. Some witches do. Usually warlocks get to around level 3, witches go up to level 4 and sometimes 5. But Theo has the power of a level 5, and that's partly why they're all so confused, because a young boy, a warlock, cannot be this powerful. And this gives credence to the idea of a trans person realizing their true gender inside. Theo's magic represents her true gender. It doesn't make sense that a warlock can be this powerful, but when you realize that Theo is in fact a girl, is in fact a witch, it all makes more sense. And I think that's really, really clever. The idea that the magic in Theo knows her true gender. I love that. But this is also where the book gets a lot more political, because you don't just have characters who accept Theo and are progressive and kind, you also get characters who turn out to be fascistic TERFs. And because this is a book set in the modern day that makes reference to things like Brexit and even one singular mention of the pandemic, the word TERF is also used. This is very much a book about now. So Theo's transness is kind of a spoiler that happens at the halfway point, but you can see why I wanted to talk about it, because it opens up so much more chatter about the book. The fact that this isn't just a really, really fun urban fantasy romp about witches and covens. It's also a very clever political book about trans people, about transphobia, and about women's spaces. Because witches and warlocks have different spaces. You've got the covens and you've got the cabals. And now Theo belongs to a coven, should be inducted into a coven, should have her own space amongst her own sisters. And you're going to have witches that fight back against this. What I also love is the fact that witches as a symbol have recently been used by transphobes. And I hate that. As someone who absolutely loves the concept of witches, I watch horror films about witches, I read books about witches, I have an article that's like 20 books that are all about witches. I love witchy stuff, and I hate that transphobes try to co-opt the imagery and the history of witches. And there is so much irony in them doing that anyway. But this book is also leaning into that. You've got a transgender author writing a book about witches and covens, and about being trans, and about witch hunts. You've now got witches in this book conducting witch hunts against this trans kid, and they don't see the irony in it. But of course we, the readers, do. This is a wonderfully, wonderfully fun novel, and honestly, it is now one of my favourite reads of this year. I think it's the most fun I've had reading a novel this year, because it wonderfully toes a line between detailed and emotive politics and a fun, witchy fantasy romp in modern Britain. I was having so much fun with the witchcraft and with the characters and the banter and the dynamics between them, and I was feeling a lot in terms of the trans politics of it all. Whether you're looking at the themes and politics, or you're looking at the fun events and characters, this book scratched every itch for me. I had so much fun reading it, I felt so satisfied by it. That's a good word to use. I think this is the most satisfying read that I've had this year, and it's now absolutely close to my top. I don't think anything can beat Orpheus Builds a Girl by Heather Parry. I think that's my favourite book of this year. But this is up there. This is close. And it's not gothic. It's not horror. But it is queer. It is trans. It is about witches and magic. It is fantastical. So I'm not surprised I love it so much, but it could have easily been written badly. The lore and the background and the setting, it all could have been handled badly, but Juno Dawson really nails it. It definitely feels quite YA in terms of the way that the characters talk to each other. There's a lot of youthful energy and sometimes bordering on cringeness in terms of the dialogue, but it's the politics and the very clever world building that ground it in something more adult and complex. But I would call this book something that really sits on a line between YA urban fantasy and adult urban fantasy. And what really sets it apart, other than the politics, is the fact that these characters swear a lot. But if you are a young reader that loves YA, you'll love this. As I said, if you love the Atlas 6, this is like that, but a good book. I can't stop doing that. Her Majesty's Royal Coven is wonderful. It's now one of my favourite books of this year. I'm so impressed by it for so many reasons that I'm starting to talk in circles. Please, please check this out. Juno Dawson is awesome. This is a wonderful, wonderful book. And look at this cover. It's fantastic. It's stunning. And there will be a sequel. In fact, I think it's going to be a series. And I can't wait. Subscribe for books.